I call the member for Maitland.
Thank you, Madam Temporary Speaker. In February 2007, I was sexually assaulted on a work trip to Africa. I was unable to access any medical assistance until I returned to Australia, as I had flights booked, and I was in shock and trauma and alone and unable to change my itinerary. As I sat on planes and waited in airport terminals, I did the calculations and knew that it would be too late for me to get the morning after pill within the required time frame before I could get back to Australia. And living in a regional area, the wait for a doctor or access to a specialist reproductive clinic meant that I had no chance of getting that pill within the required time. I would just have to wait and hope that I had not been impregnated. And as someone who had been told in my earlier years that conception would be difficult for me, and despite my heartfelt desire to have children and the love that I have for my own 2 children, I still don't know in my heart what I would have done if I had have become pregnant in those circumstances. But what I do know, Madam Speaker, is that I believe abortions should be safe, legal and rare. There are many brave women who have shared their stories of having abortions in this place and in other public spaces, particularly over the last few weeks, about making that choice. And I pay my deepest respects to them all. But I remember too, and I pay my respects to those we have lost because our draconian laws place the beliefs of some above their health. I have always supported a woman's right to choose whether or not she has a child. Always. I supported the former Chief Minister and Health Minister of the ACT, the Honourable Wayne Berry, as he worked for the decriminalisation of abortion in the ACT. In the early 1990s in Canberra, I stood on polling booths to support decriminalisation. I have been a long-time member of Emily's List, and at the recent state and federal elections on polling booths and elsewhere, I have been questioned, sometimes quite aggressively, on my views, and I have always been clear. As a teenager, I supported my friend who found herself pregnant and not being allowed by her parents to even have a boyfriend, had to make the trip to Sydney to have an illegal abortion in secret before returning to work in Canberra that night. I will never forget her pale face, her fear and her distress. Recently, I spoke to a close friend who was devastated to find that the abortion she had some years ago was illegal. She had never contemplated this fact or this aspect before. She made the right decision for her based on the welfare of the 3 children she already had and the fact that she was suddenly single and needed to provide for them. And the terrible part about this debate is that it triggered her, making her again question her decision, stigmatising her actions and shaming her. It is truly heartbreaking to observe this, and my heart goes out to her and all the other women who have made this choice and have had to go through this traumatic triggering again. Last week, I listened to Jessica, a young paramedic outside this place, say that she no longer wants to go into women's bathrooms and have to spend the first few vital minutes as they lie bleeding on the floor, trying to reassure them that they are not going to be in trouble before she can help save their lives. In my former roles as Shadow Minister for the Prevention of Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault and Acting Shadow Minister for Women, I heard countless stories of how the fact that abortion is still a crime in this state has hampered women's attempt to escape domestic, family or sexual violence. This shame, this stigma, this fear of the law must stop. I was honoured to lead for the opposition in this place on the Honourable Penny Sharp Safe Access Zone that was co-sponsored by Trevor Khan. I stayed in the chamber throughout that debate. I listened to the speeches of all members in this place, and last night I reread them as I've read every email and letter that has been sent to me on this topic. I thank everyone from across Australia who has sent me representations in a respectful manner. I particularly thank Reverend Simon Hansford and the Reverend Margaret Mayhem for her wise words at the rally this morning, and I thank Bishop Peter Stewart, Anglican Bishop of Newcastle, for his letter supporting this bill. They have been very much appreciated. Regardless of all the views expressed, I wish that all of the correspondence I have received in the last few weeks had been so respectful. I thank my staff who have had to read emails or take phone calls that have been graphic, abusive and distressing at times, and I apologise that they have had to deal with this. I am a co-sponsor for this historic bill. I thank the working group for the honour and privilege of being one of those co-sponsors. This is an important debate and I'm very glad that we are finally having it. A lot has been said in the public debate about conscience and religious freedom, and although I stand by every single word I said in that debate on the Safe Access Zones bill, it is conscience and religious freedom that I want to address today. I was brought up as a Catholic, and my beliefs on social justice have always felt consistent with the teachings of the Catholic Church, except in relation to abortion. I knew from close hand the difficulties, the lifelong consequences of unplanned pregnancies, friends who had adopted themselves, friends who adopted out children and then grieved for them for years, knowing they were having lives they could never see, friends who had abortions under other often horrendous circumstances, or who had abortions and then had difficulties conceiving later and blamed themselves, and those who faced medical issues or even death if they persisted in their pregnancies. As I said last year, life is complex, messy and unique, and not one of us, not one, knows what is ahead of us or how we will face it. It just didn't make sense to me, and it still doesn't, that the compassionate and caring God I know would judge these girls and these women for the choices they made in circumstances where they were disempowered, financially insecure, mortally ill, emotionally unprepared, or whatever else it was that had led them to make that most difficult decision. Many years ago in the Catholic Catechism from Vatican II, Gaudium et Spes, Joy and Hope, Dignitatis Humanae, the dignity of human person, Article 6 on moral conscience, I found my answer. It says, deep within his conscience, man discovers a law, which he has not laid upon himself, but which he must obey. For man has in his heart a law inscribed by God. His conscience is man's most secret core and his sanctuary. Man has the right to act in conscience and in freedom so as personally to make moral decisions. The question of conscience has vexed many people of faith on this issue, and I thank Patsy McGarry for his comments in the Irish Times during the referendum in that country. He said, before 1969, the Catholic Church, there was no homicide involved if abortion took place before the fetus was infused with a soul and became a human being. Ensoulment was the word that was used to describe this. That, it said, took place at quickening when there is the first movement in the womb. In 1591, Pope Gregory XIV sent ensoulment 166 days of pregnancy, almost 24 weeks. In 1869, Pope Pius IX moved the clock to the moment of conception under penalty of excommunication. But Mr McGarry goes on to say, nevertheless, the matter is still subject to debate in the Catholic Church. Even as recently as 1974, the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith acknowledged that the issue of ensoulment was still an open question. In summary, it is possible for a good Catholic in good faith to act contrary to the teachings of the Church. I do not presume to call myself a good Catholic, but I am a person of deep faith in a compassionate God, and I have been gravely offended by those who have assumed that I am not. But I ask those who oppose this bill on the basis of their conscience, on the basis of their faith, to let women in this state make their own decisions based on their consciences and their faith. I will not be one to judge others. Or as Matthew 7:1-2 says, judge not that ye be not judged, for with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged, and with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again. Madam Speaker, can I please have a temporary extension?
The question is that the member's time be extended. All of those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? an extension is granted.
Thank you. Most importantly, we must remember that by respecting the beliefs and privacies of others, and this is very important, by respecting their beliefs and privacy, we do not diminish our own faith. In fact, we strengthen it. I feel that this is an issue that has been lost in this debate. I speak today not to defend my own vote in favour of the bill, but to reach out to other members who may be conflicted by their faith. I am not someone that wears their faith on their sleeve, and I think many members would be surprised to hear me talk about it, but I think it is something that we need to talk about because I know some members are struggling with it. There is a place for people of faith to ensure that women are able to access safe and legal abortion in New South Wales by decriminalisation. Women who are poor in regional, rural and remote areas, who are disempowered by those who are around them, should be free to make a choice about what happens to their own bodies. And in our hearts, we all know that this will reduce late-term abortions. For those who argue it's been legal to have an abortion in New South Wales since 1971, when Judge Levine delivered his decision in R.V. Wald, consider that just 2 years ago, a woman was prosecuted for self-inducing an abortion. I understand that this case has been used to deny women access to abortion since then, and if you read that case, and I urge you to do so, you will see that there are probably a lot of other issues going on, and she was the last person who should have been prosecuted. Women from my own electorate have told terrible stories of being unable to access medical abortions, causing more trauma, more expense and more delays. And I agree with the Leader of the Opposition when she said earlier that we must ensure that women from regional, rural and remote electorates must be able to access safe and legal abortion. We can no longer be hypocrites in this place. We cannot put the rights of potential, future, emerging or imagined children above the women who stand in front of us. We either support women who seek abortion and treat them with compassion and love, or we treat them as criminals. That, at its heart, is the simple question we must ask ourselves. We are in this place to make laws which reflect the will of our people in our community, not to make moral judgments on them. More than 73% of people support women for safe and legal access to abortion. Many people in New South Wales don't even know it's a crime. After 119 years, it's past time for the New South Wales Parliament to reflect that support for women in our community. It's a law that was made nearly 20 years before women were even allowed to be elected in this place, and it is a law that was not even debated in this Parliament until 2 years ago. Some members have argued about the technical aspects of this bill. I leave it to them. After 119 years, I say enough. As a previous speaker said, do not let perfection stand in the way of good. Many of these amendments, in fact, go against the very aims of the bill. I wish a woman's voice had been enough to start this conversation in this place. Sadly, one woman's voice is still not enough. I thank all of you who have raised your voices with us to bring us to this point. I hope our voices will be heard at last. I thank each and every member of the 90 organisations that form the New South Wales Pro-Choice Alliance, and I don't have time, I'm sorry, to go through them individually, but I thank them so much. I think back to those agonising moments that stretched into hours, that stretched into days and weeks in 2007, while I waited to find out if the violence that had been perpetrated on me would leave me with a pregnancy and perhaps a child, as well as the lifelong trauma, pain and suffering of my rape. It was just too much, and that will never leave me. As a victim survivor, I say to everyone in this place, it is wrong that I would have been subject to the same act, the Crimes Act of 1900, as my perpetrator if I had have been impregnated. Abortion simply does not belong in the Crimes Act. I commend the bill to the House.
We're dealing with a reproductive